Welcome to American Pulse. Today's show is very strong and very informative. I'm privileged to have J.D. Gordon. Hi, Mr. Gordon.
مرحبا يا مايكل. كيف حالك؟
تمام. Welcome to the show.
تمام.
Mr. Gordon was a former Navy commander and a former Pentagon spokesman for 4 years. Mr. Gordon is currently the executive director of Act for America. A lot of things he's doing, he cares so much about what happens globally now, and he speaks out and he's trying to get his point across. Welcome to American Pulse.
مرحبا يا مايكل. حبيبي, good to see you today.
Good to see you as well, Habibi. I'm wondering, do you have any Arabic background, because you know a lot of words in Arabic?
نعم. You know, I actually did a DNA test, and I found out that I was 2% North African in my blood. So yes,
that could
I do.
Be North African, that could be Egyptian too.
It could be Egyptian, of course, exactly. Exactly right.
That's great to know. Mr. Gordon, I'm actually concerned, and there's a lot of things and a lot of topics we're going to be talking about, but the first thing that comes to my mind, I feel like, we're either being set up or we're setting up for a World War III. I see countries are gathering together, countries are going away from each other. There's a battlefield in the Middle East. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that unfortunately the world is a much more dangerous place right now because of the presidential decisions of Barack Obama. I think President Obama sees the U.S. power as a problem in the world, and I think that as the U.S. power has weakened, other actors have risen up to fill that power vacuum. So I think when America's weaker, actors that are not interested in peace and that just want to take over pieces of the world, like Daesh, the Islamic State, for instance.
Yeah.
When the United States pulled out of Iraq, that left a power vacuum for Daesh to create a state, essentially, out of 1/3 of Syria and 1/3 of Iraq right now. We've also seen Russia start to reconstitute a new empire, carving up pieces of Ukraine. They already have pieces of Georgia. They threaten other neighbors in the Baltics and other states.
And they bringing allies like Egyptians and...
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so as America becomes weaker under the policies of President Obama, the world is less safe, and you have terror groups that get stronger. So that's what's happening right now.
I want to slice this differently, and I want to start when we went to Iraq, because I feel like this is what happened. When I think it was a mistake. I don't know. What do you think? But could we have handled Iraq file better?
Absolutely, absolutely. When I was in the Pentagon, the logic behind going to war in Iraq, I was the Pentagon spokesman.
At that time?
At that time. I was the Pentagon spokesman from 2005 to 2009. And so the Iraq War started in 2003. Mm-hmm. And so when I was there at the time, the logic behind the war, if you listen to Secretary Rumsfeld, my old boss, Doug Feith, who was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, one of the key architects of the war, they would tell you the reason for toppling Saddam Hussein was so that we could prevent another 9/11 in the United States. Because Saddam Hussein had repeatedly evaded weapons inspectors. So nobody really knew what he had. And we did know he had some chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction because they got them from the United States to fight the Iranians in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So we knew there were some. We just didn't know the scope of the programs. Mm-hmm. And Saddam was playing all these games with UN weapons inspectors. Saddam wanted the world to believe he did have a nuclear program so people wouldn't attack him. He miscalculated. He was bluffing.
He was bluffing is the word.
And the U.S. called him out on it. Now, the only way for the U.S. to be successful in Iraq long term is to break Saddam Hussein's government and to occupy it for decades. Just like we still have troops in Germany, Japan, Italy, the U.S. still has troops in those places after World War II. The only way for Iraq to be still peaceful and not going to war is if the U.S. has a massive presence. But President Obama took all our troops out. So then there was a power vacuum. And in Iraq, there are three major groups. There's the Shia Arabs in the south, the Sunni Arabs in the center in the north, and then the Kurds, the Kurdish Sunnis in the northeastern pocket. and neither of those groups get along. All three fight for power and jockey for power. But the plurality, the majority of Iraqis are Shia. That's 60% of the country. So in national elections, they're always going to win. So after the U.S. Toppled Saddam, we set up a government which was Shia-dominated. When the U.S. pulled out, then the Shia-dominated government became very close with Iran, because Iran is also well over 90% Shia.
Yes.
It's a regime that supports the Shia type of Islam, and it also seeks to expand and conquer other parts of the world too.
Well, they wanted to conquer the whole world.
They do. Iran does. Iran would conquer the whole world if they could.
Yeah, that's what they want.
That's why they're building a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
Exactly. But since the Shia government was so damaging against the Sunni Arabs and the Kurds, they kept them under their thumb. That created a lot of resentment, which fed into the creation of Daesh. Because Daesh originally was the Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the destroyed remnants, and then they founded their own caliphate now.
I'm going to stop here because there's accusation of the Americans that, Egyptians to the Americans that we created Daesh. Does that make sense?
No.
Does that make sense at any level?
It doesn't make any sense.
It's just hard to believe, though.
Yeah.
It's very hard to believe.
Here's what that liberal, progressive argument takes you. They think that since the Iraq War happened, Saddam Hussein was toppled, and then Daesh was founded. But that's ignoring history. It just
took out like a chunk of years.
Yes, exactly. It pretends history started in 2003.
Yeah.
That's why that view is not accurate. If you peel the onion back, it's very important to peel layers back to see the truth.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at why Saddam was aggressive towards the United States and towards the West, well, it was because he was attacked to be forced out of Kuwait, 1991, Desert Storm. And then if you look, well, why did he attack Kuwait? Well, he attacked Kuwait because he got a lot in debt. He got billions and billions of dollars in debt fighting Iran. He was the champion of the Arabs fighting the Persians. So the United States backed Iraq from 1980 to 1988. Over 1 million people were killed between the Iraqis and the Iranians. Kuwait loaned a lot of money to Iraq. When the war was over, Saddam said, look, Kuwait, we fought for you. If not for us, you'd be part of Iran right now.
So
and they said, well, too bad. You're not getting your money. Mm-hmm. Not just that, number two, then they started slant oil drilling underneath Iraqi territory.
So you get the oil from this.
Yes, so not only did they not forgive the loans, Kuwait was slant oil drilling. So Saddam Hussein says, you know what? You're province 16, and they just took them. Now that's bad. But then we went to war against him, and ever since we drove him out, the U.S. had a bombing campaign for 12 more years because we had a no-fly zone to protect the Shia in the south and the Kurds in the north because of the Halabja massacre when Saddam killed, I think it was about 500 Kurds with poison gas.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of backstory. The history didn't start in 2003 like the liberals will tell you.
That's how it looks like. But what I'm trying to say is there's arguments that we destroyed as an American citizens, as American administration, we destroyed the only buffer system against Iran, which was Iraq. Because if it wasn't for Iraq, we would have been fighting with Iran this whole time, and Iraq was taking Iran, and then after Iraq is over, now we have to face Iran. Well, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that the Saudis are the next big buffer to Iran. Just because Saddam's regime's been toppled doesn't mean there's not a buffer. Mm-hmm. The Saudis are a buffer. But also, you have to remember, Saddam was being very destabilizing, too. When we'd have cases where there were Palestinian suicide bombers in Israel, Saddam would give the families money to buy a new house, or it was blood money. And so that helped create more suicide bombers. I mean, every time you turned around, Saddam was doing something bad. Something bad. That was a threat to the United States and to our ally Israel.
Okay. I want to shift a little bit to Egypt. January 25th, 2011, June 30th, 2013. Two revolution in a big country like Egypt. It must have shaken the country somehow. And unfortunately, after June 30th, we didn't find the right support with our allies like the United States of America, and they were always saying that it was a coup, it was a coup. So we ended up looking for a friendship somewhere else with the Russians. How can we fix this?
A new election in the United States for people that care about freedom, democracy, and people that care about keeping ourselves safe and Egypt safe. We're going to have another election in 2016, so hopefully Barack Obama's successor isn't a Democrat. Because if you have to look at the mentality, why is President Obama so hard on President al-Sisi? Why did President Obama back President Morsi and the Ikhwan?
Yes.
You have to take a look at the mentality. If you look at what happened in the United States in the 1960s, there was a civil rights issue to fight for equal rights for everybody, regardless of their race, ethnicity. Well, there were two ways to fight the power for civil rights, for blacks to be equal to whites. There was the nonviolent way under Dr. Martin Luther King, and then there was the violent way under the Nation of Islam. If you look at their big figures, Malcolm X and others who started that movement, I don't think they were particularly religious. Sure, Malcolm X did the Hajj, he went to Mecca, but I don't think he was a religious man, but he was very anti-U.S., Malcolm X. Malcolm X was very anti-U.S. power. Well, the people that were raised in the civil rights that were against U.S. power were on the side of the international left. One of my favorite pictures to look at from history, from 1959 actually, Che Guevara, one of the biggest communist leaders, inspirational figures in the world. He was in Gaza, rallying the Palestinian leaders in 1959. So the international left is very much a part of the mindset that supports the Ikhwan. So where am I going with this? Well, I think President Obama is an international leftist. The left supports the Islamists. The left used to support the communists, but it's not cool to be a communist anymore. It's cool to be an Islamist for the left. So I think that President Obama is so intent on punishing President al-Sisi and the Egyptians now because he's tied to the international left. That's one point. The second point is follow the money. In Washington...
So the money's always the issue.
Always the issue. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest think tanks, the biggest think tank in Washington is called Brookings Institute. They're very well respected. They have a lot of former ambassadors and very high officials in the State Department and the former top diplomats. They have hundreds of people at Brookings. And if you look at the things they write about in the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're very anti-President al-Sisi. And you figure, why are they so hard on Egypt?
Just annoying, yeah.
Right. Well, look at where they're getting their funding. If you look at Charity Navigator, which shows you public charities where people get money, you'll find that the government of Qatar gave $21 million to Brookings Institute over the last 4 or 5 years. $21 million. That buys a lot of influence.
Money,
So it's big money. Who else does the government of Qatar give money to? The Ikhwan. So now you know. The Brookings Institute shares and advances the same policies from the same pot of money that goes to the Ikhwan. So now you know why you see those arguments. Then people read the New York Times and the Washington Post, they think, oh, here's a column from somebody at Brookings complaining about the lack of democracy in Egypt. Like the democracy was any better under President Morsi.
Morsi, yeah.
Morsi became a dictator within a year. And they tortured people.
Yes.
Was that any better? But they don't criticize that because they're not getting paid to criticize that. The Brookings Institute, that's just one example.
That's very sad. I mean, journalism and media, things have to be up in the air. We have, part of our profession is to get to the viewer or to the reader what the facts are. Yes. But this is not what's happening here.
It's not what's happening, and I'm not blaming directly the Washington Post and the New York Times. I'm blaming the people that work at the think tanks that get big money. Yeah. Big money. $21 million is a lot. And they're writing these columns, and then they're from an international left viewpoint. Yep. And then the New York Times and Washington Post are the two of the biggest papers in the United States, very influential. Mm-hmm. They also have a left-leaning mentality, leftists, like Obama. So it's an alliance, really, of the left and the money from the Islamists. So the Islamists and the international leftists are tied like that. That's why President Obama is so tough on the current government in Egypt.
Why is, Qatar is the size of my hometown back in Egypt. Why are they causing so much trouble for their size?
They're rich, and they have Al Jazeera, for instance, and they get their message out a lot that way too, which was part of the conflict for the Al Jazeera reporters who were jailed in Egypt because they were pushing too much for the Ikhwan point of view and causing unrest. And so Qatar has a lot of people who are very committed to the Islamist cause. They're very hardcore.
So they have an agenda they want.
Yes, they have an agenda. They're hardcore, and guess what? As you know, I don't have to say guess what even, you know, once President Mubarak was toppled, even though he was a regime that was in power probably way too long, he had been the president since the 70s, he wanted to hand off to his son, what happened when he got toppled? It was open season on Coptic Christians.
Yes.
Coptics were targeted by the Ikhwan.
I mean, Copts are, or Coptic Christians are always the ones are paying for bills. I always say that.
Yes.
You know, at the Mubarak time and the Mubarak regime, they were killed and, kidnapped and this. And Morsi was worse. I mean, finally, in Sisi's time, the man's starting to speak out and say enough is enough. I mean, these people have been tortured. And yet, they never given up on their country.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we had this horrible incident where the 21 Coptic Christians were beheaded in Libya, in Derna. I'm glad that President al-Sisi at least launched the Egyptian airstrikes to punish those Islamic State affiliates. Daesh should not be allowed to get away with that. So I applaud President al-Sisi 100%.
As a former Pentagon spokesman, do you think what he did was right by just going ahead and targeting those extremists and then sending the Minister of Foreign Affairs to the UN? Or should he had counseled with the U.S. like what they claiming that he never done and they were upset about it?
He took the right action, because he had to strike while he had the intelligence that he had. Now, surely, moving forward, if Egypt wants to be part of that coalition, that is a 60-country coalition fighting Daesh, they should coordinate in the future. But for the immediate strikes, no, he did the right thing, absolutely.
Because, the media here didn't take it very well that, the White House was informed of those attacks. And I don't think he needed to inform anyone at this level because, he's taking revenge for 21 people were beheaded alive. I mean, for God's sake, we're in 2015, 21st centuries, and we're watching these kind of videos of people beheaded. Right. It's awful.
It is awful. He did the absolute right thing. You would think President Obama would want to support President al-Sisi better than he does, but it's not just Egypt. Let me tell you one other good example. Jordan, King Abdullah II. He's been a pretty strong ally of the United States. Well, his government asked the United States for Predator drones last year so they could help target Daesh over in Syria, in Iraq. That would have been a good use of Jordan's military capability. But you know what the State Department said? They said no.
Why not?
They said Jordan wasn't a close enough ally. And if you figure, well, why is Jordan not a close enough ally? Again, peel the onion back a little bit and see the layers inside. What's inside of that? The Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan. Because the Ikhwan in Amman is trying to get their leaders out of jail. The Ikhwan wanted to overthrow King Abdullah.
The King Abdullah.
Yeah, the Ikhwan has been pushing for quote-unquote democracy in Jordan. In other words, they want to take over Jordan like they took over Egypt. The United States basically says, okay, King Abdullah, what about those leaders in jail? Oh, they're still in jail? No predators. President Obama in the White House.
So now it looks like
King Abdullah's.
Now again, it looks like that the American administration and our administration, U.S. policy, is supporting the Muslim Brotherhood.
Looks like it. It is. It's horrible. Michael, it's really horrible. That's what this White House does. They supported the Ikhwan to take over in Cairo. They supported
and they got upset
Morsi.
that we throw them out of power.
And then they got upset, it was a coup. Well, even though the Muslim Brotherhood is also letting all these rockets go through Gaza. So Hamas had thousands of rockets. Hamas shot 4,000 rockets into Israel last year. So what does President Obama say? Israel has to go back to the 1967 borders, which are militarily indefensible. The government of President al-Sisi wants peace in the Middle East, They want good relations with Israel, good relations with the United States, but President Obama is more interested in making sure that the international left and the Islamists have more power. How else do you describe it?
I want to talk more about President Sisi after this break. Welcome back to American Pulse. We have former Pentagon spokesman, Mr. J.D. Gordon. Welcome back, Mr. Gordon.
Yeah, Michael.
Thank you. I wanted to know, and I wanted my viewers to know also, I mean, Pentagon is a big thing, and we always wanted to know the dynamics that have happened behind the stage and behind the scenes. So how does the order come? Does it come from the President, from the Minister of Defense? What's the dynamic there?
Well, there's a deputies committee at the White House that meets between top leaders in the White House, Defense Department, State Department, CIA, and if there's going to be any type of military action, they make that decision there. And so it has all the departments weighed in, the President on down. And then the President directs the military, the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, to deploy our forces. Now, if it's going to be long-term combat operations, then you need an authorization of use of military force, which is called the AUMF. Now, we had one for Iraq, and we had one for Afghanistan, and that has to pass the Congress. And so President Obama just recently went to Congress last month, this past month, in February, requesting the AUMF for the fight against the Islamic State.
Yes, for 3 years, that's what he did.
For 3 years.
Why 3 years? I was just amazed. Does he think it's going to take him 3 years to get rid of him? I thought it would take a few months to get rid of him.
Well, he put it at 3 years because he wants to limit the scope of it. And he also wants to limit the scope of whether there are ground troops or not, which I think is a mistake. When you fight a war, you have to throw everything on the table. Yeah. You don't limit it to 3 years, limit it to no ground troops. You fight to win.
Especially like I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if we had done this a year ago, things couldn't have been as worse as they are right now. Yeah. If we started earlier.
Correct. Right now, Daesh is over 20,000 people, was 30,000. They've got now a third of Iraq, a third of Syria. Had we acted a couple years ago, when it was just the rebels in Syria doing bad,
3,000, 2,000 people.
Right. The United States and the coalition waited way too long.
Do you think we'll be able to defeat them?
Yes, we will, eventually. But you know what? We have to defeat the ideology. Because unless we stop this poisonous version of radical Islam, it's just going to be one series of terror groups after the other. And in order to defeat radical Islam, we have to defeat it where it's starting from. And it's starting from Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabism, the radical Sunni version, and it's starting in Tehran, the radical Shia version. And they both want to dominate the world. That's where this ideology is coming from. The way to stop that ideology is to change the textbooks for children, to teach tolerance, change the blasphemy laws. You should be able to say anything you want and not get killed for it in the Middle East.
Yeah, you can get sued for what you say. You have to take responsibility of what you say. You could be terminated from certain groups or organization, but not to be killed. I think
not
killing
to be killed
is it's
And they also need equality between men and women. Look, if you look at the pictures from Egypt in the 1970s, men and women were more or less equal. You looked at how women dressed. No hijabs. They wore skirts and dresses. That's not the case today. So what changed?
And actually, my Muslim friends tell me that hijab is not part of the religion anyways. It's just addition to...
I hear that all the time from my Muslim friends. They say, well, a hijab, there's nothing Islamic about a hijab. Nothing Islamic about a burqa or niqab. I'm like, well, great. Tell people. I'm not going to sit here in Washington or New York and tell people that they can't wear a hijab. You tell them.
Yes.
But that's what we need. We need equality between men and women.
And also, I think, beside the airstrikes and the armies and all that, I think much more importantly is the Muslim countries and the Muslim people themselves. They have to stand up and put their foot down and say, this is not Islam, this is not Islamic. We have to protect the religion, and we have to rectify all the, problems with the books that says, killing and burning of people.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you watched that burning of the Jordanian pilot last month.
Horrific. Unbelievable.
What did the guy ever do in his life to be burned alive that way?
Right, I know. I mean, I think they overstepped their bounds there because the whole world could see, well, that's not very Islamic. If you're trying to be the Islamic State and you torture another Muslim, a fellow Muslim alive in a cage,
Yes.
that's so barbaric.
Yeah.
The whole world could see they're not really an Islamic group. However, they do use Islam to recruit, to get funding. So it's part of the problem within Islam. People within Islam and people within the Middle East have to stamp it out.
How do you see the next few months from your perspective on our war on terror?
I think that the Iraqi government's going to take the lead in trying to recapture Mosul first. Mosul is a city of over 1 million people in northern Iraq. It used to be 1.8 million people a few years ago.
Yeah.
Now it's just over 1 million because all the Christians left,
Yeah.
the Kurds left, because they were getting crucified, killed, and everything taken by Islamic State. Right. So I think over the next few months, the Iraqi military, they announced in April or May, they're going to start the offensive in Mosul. I think we're going to see more bombing campaigns from the U.S. and our allies from the U.K., France, Canada, Australia, that's in Iraq. And in Syria, our allies are Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bahrain, UAE. They're also bombing in Syria. And I think we need to do a better job of arming the Kurdish Peshmerga. Those are the best fighters on the ground, and they're not getting enough weapons right now, so they need more help.
But you see, there's something I'm scared about when we've always done the same mistake over and over, that we're arming people and then they turn, after they finish their job, they turn on us. Same thing happened with Al-Qaeda, the Free Army in Syria. You know, couldn't it be a better way instead of arming people?
Well, I mean, unless we want to have the ground forces be from Saudi Arabia, from the governments, the Jordanian military, the military of Bahrain, UAE, they could, but they haven't had the political will. The people that are fighting for their lives right now are the Kurds, and that's just the Kurds. All these Iraqi Christians, they're hiding. They're in refugee camps in the Kurdish-held areas, because otherwise their areas were overrun, like the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar. They'd be all dead right now if they weren't protected by the Kurds.
Egypt, what do you think of Egypt in the past 3 years, in the current situation, and in the next few years?
I'm very encouraged by the current government in Egypt because they faced the Muslim Brotherhood and they punched them in the face, knocked them on the ground. Pretty much. We need more of that in the Middle East. We need somebody finally to stand up to the radical Islamists and knock them on their butt. That's what President al-Sisi did. We need more of that. I also think Egypt should export their culture. Egypt has been dominated culturally by the Saudis since the 1970s. Since the 1970s, the Saudis have spent over $100 billion throughout the world in exporting their version of Wahhabism. That's why women even have hijabs now in Egypt. In the 70s, they didn't even have them at all. It wasn't even thought of. I have a good friend of mine. She's from Gaza. She's a reporter for Al Arabiya. And she said that when she was a teenager, she hitchhiked from Gaza to Cairo. I said, what? How could you? She's like, no, JD, look.
It's crazy.
It was different in those times because she grew up as a teenager in the 1980s. She said people were just starting to become very religious, but you had a lot of freedom as a Palestinian girl those days. Now you don't.
Nothing.
Not even for Egyptian girls. Egypt could change that. You know what? I'm not suggesting they tell people what to wear or not to wear, but there should be a public information campaign in Egypt to say, look, stop Saudi culture. We are Egyptian cultures. Could anybody ever imagine someone going up to Queen Cleopatra and say, where's your hijab? Or the goddess Isis, the mother of Horus. Horus was the patron for the pharaohs. Could anybody tell seeing Isis, that picture's no good of you, goddess Isis, put on a niqab? What? Egypt should stand up. It is the origin of Middle Eastern culture. It's the land of the pyramids, the land of the pharaohs. Egypt should export their culture. I'm tired of this Wahhabism from Saudi Arabia and Qatar dominating the whole region. Egypt should support their culture.
But then we see Saudi Arabia right now is trying to help out Egypt to defeat terror. Did they just finally realize that they were doing something bad, and now because they created the monster, they're scared of it and they just want to get the monster out of the way?
That. They created a monster, and now they're just saying, well, what do we do?
What do we do?
We created this crazy
Can't put them
monster.
back, yeah.
Right, exactly. Because the Saudi king, they don't like Al-Qaeda either. I mean, Al-Qaeda would kill them too. The reason why Al-Qaeda is so strong in Yemen is because they staged 3 very major attacks in Saudi Arabia in 2003. The Saudis cracked the whip. They were beheading people. The government beheads people in Saudi Arabia still. So they fled to Yemen, where they're in the Hadramaut, in those mountainous areas, lawless, tribal areas. So that's why they're so strong in Yemen. But Saudi Arabia can't go, they don't want to go into Yemen and wipe them all out. Saudi Arabia doesn't want to put their troops into Syria or Iraq. They should. But yeah, now they're begging Egypt, please help us.
Yeah. Egypt now is in an awkward situation, which I feel that we're fighting terrorism in Sinai. Now we have the Libyan borders. There's a lot of weapons gets smuggled into the country from the Sudanese borders. There's a threat from Yemen that they want to stop stop the ships and everything going through the Suez Canal. I mean, I believe Egypt is very strong and can stand, but I don't know how long they could support.
You're right. That's why it's really important for Egyptians in the United States even to make the case for why we need leadership in the White House that's going to support Egypt, that's going to support freedom. President al-Sisi supports freedom. He
Yes.
supports equal rights. He supports human rights. More people in this country need to understand that. I say that all the time. I'm a U.S. columnist and national television commentator. I talk about the way we have to support Egypt all the time, because if we don't support them, it's going to get worse.
How come we don't see parts of the world like Canada, for instance, involved in these things?
We see Canada involved a little bit. I mean, they've got F-18 jets in Iraq bombing Daesh targets now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's small. There's not a lot of people. So it's a much smaller country. It's like only like 30 million, so it's 10% of the United States.
Do you think France has learned a lesson?
Yes. I think France has learned a lesson with the Charlie Hebdo attacks.
Yes.
The thing is, France has well over 5 million Muslims there, and they don't do a very good job of integrating them in French society. So there are a lot of refugees that came from Algeria, from the wars there, from Morocco, Tunisia, also right across the Mediterranean, and they have these pockets where they don't really integrate. They don't want to speak French, a lot of them. Some do, but even so, even if they do speak French,
just want to live in the same areas, they want to talk together, go to the same places at the same.
And it's not really their parents. It's not the people that actually came. It's more the kids, the people that were born in France, to say, look, I'm an Arab, but I'm French, but I'll never be the president of France. Because France it's hard, you're not going to be the president. And so there's this glass ceiling, sort of like, well, I like rap music, I want to be cool, I want to be a thug, I want to be a tough guy. And they're like, well, yeah, Islam, I'll turn to Islam. And that's what happens. Because Islam is very powerful. It's a powerful religion, yeah. The Quran is pretty tough. If you read the Quran, there are a lot of passages about killing people, beheading people, stoning people. It's tough.
Yeah, but these things were meant for certain areas and certain time.
Sure.
And, we don't really apply them in this time of humanity. But the problem is, people are abusing the text.
They abuse the text. The Bible's pretty violent too. There's people getting stoned in the Bible and killed too. But you don't have Christians going out and say, okay, I want to go stone a bunch of people today. It's the culture's different. Whether they're Christians in Egypt or Christians in Iraq or Christians in the U.S., that's not part of the thread. But in Islam, there's a bunch of people that interpret it in a radical way.
As an American yourself, are you worried about the strong ties between Egypt and Russia right now?
I'm not worried about it. I think it's unfortunate because Egypt sees another power. Russia used to support Egypt back during the Cold War. I mean, Nasser was a pan-Arab expansionist, and then the Russians were very close to Nasser.
But then, that President Sisi has called for that Arab regathering again. Do you think he's following the footsteps of Nasser again?
I wouldn't quite go that far. I mean, during Nasser, there was a merger of the two governments of Syria and Egypt.
Yeah, that was
at one
huge.
point. Yeah. I mean, so I don't think President al-Sisi's doing that. I think that President al-Sisi's doing the smart things to unify the Middle Eastern secular leaders, because the biggest challenge to them right now is the Ikhwan, is Islamists, Daesh. So yeah, if pan-Arab thought's going to stop that, then yeah, that's what they need. Anything to stop that.
Yeah. What's your advice to an average Egyptian American that live in the States? How can Egyptian Americans help both Egypt and America?
They should start telling the truth that the problem that we have today from radical Islam comes from the ideology, and there's a problem. So it's up to those people to fight against that problem, to change the textbooks, change the blasphemy laws, encourage tolerance, encourage women to be equal with men. And yeah, they should, I can't tell them what to do, but if I never see another hijab, there in Egypt, they're making progress. Mm-hmm. So if they want to make progress, those
basically you want people to practice the religion in churches and mosques at their homes, but not in the public where we have to be all equal.
Right.
Tolerant to everybody.
Leave their religions in their house.
Yes. Do you think this is something that could be doable in the Middle East at this stage with all the tension and pressure?
With leaders like President al-Sisi, yeah, I believe so. I think we could make it happen. I've got great friends, as you know, on our network. Yosra, who was absolutely wonderful. Hussein Fahmy also. Yeah. If you have Egyptian role models and celebrities like that, they can help push that agenda where Egypt embraces people having their own rights. Mm-hmm. Yosra's one of my favorite people in the world. She's like the Sophia Loren of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. You don't see her wearing a hijab because she shouldn't have to.
Yeah. And she's a Muslim. She's a Muslim and she practices Islam. And
she's observant.
She's observant.
You don't have to wear a hijab to be observant. I mean, they need a whole culture change. People like Yosra and Hussein Fahmy and President al-Sisi could make that change.
Act for America. Talk to me about that.
It's Protect America Today. That's my super PAC. And we run ads for candidates during the Senate and House elections and for the president who are strong on national security and smart on foreign policy. So during the 2014 congressional cycle, we ran ads for 8 Senate candidates and 8 House candidates, so 16 candidates in 8 states. We won 13 out of 16 races, 13 out of 16. And then in 2012, we supported Governor Romney, and we supported Senate and candidates in 8 states. We only won 5 out of 16 elections that time. So we did much better in this last election cycle, 13 out of 16 wins.
What do you expect for the next elections in 2016?
I think we're going to have a change from the White House because the Americans are getting tired of seeing how Barack Obama is leading the country, tired of seeing how he's always supporting the Ikhwan and not supporting our real friends like President al-Sisi. People are getting wise to that. People don't like how he also isn't strong enough with guys like Vladimir Putin and how he is he's really hurting jobs. If you look at the healthcare law, that just created a lot of bureaucracy. So I think we're going to get a Republican president.
And that's what you think?
I think so, because people are tired of the American.
Who are the Republicans that might be in the White House, you think, who are eligible and they have the momentum to get to that stage?
Well, there are about 10 candidates that are the lead candidates right now, and we'll have to see what happens. Several former governors, several former and current senators, and some business leaders. I think that Governor Mike Huckabee has a very good chance, the former governor of Arkansas. He was a top-tier presidential candidate in 2008. And then after him, of course, Governor Jeb Bush, who is the brother of George Bush, the son of George H.W. Bush.
So you think he's going to go back to the Bush family?
Well, he will try, former governor of Florida. And then there's, of course, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, who represents the libertarian-type Republicans that are much softer on defense. They wanted to cut all foreign aid completely, which wouldn't be good for Egypt. The U.S. gives Egypt about $1.5 billion a year in aid.
And well, it's in equipment and
equipment. Yes, mostly in equipment. It's buying a lot of equipment here and giving it to Egypt.
Qatar gets it in cash, and Israel gets it in cash.
You guys get military equipment and everything, so it's still important.
Yeah, it is, of course.
And then you've also got Governor Rick Perry from Texas, the former governor of Texas, who was a presidential candidate last time, and Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. Right now, he's going to be a major candidate, and Governor Scott Walker from Wisconsin. And he's going to be a tough candidate as well.
Mm-hmm. So we were hoping for a change, and I mean, we all care for America. We want strong America. We want protected and protective America. So we'll definitely hope for the best in the next few years. We'll talk more about Egypt and the Middle East right after this break. So welcome back to American Pulse. More questions to J.D. Gordon. Mr. Gordon, you're here in New York in a special mission this time, and I would like you to talk about it.
Yes, here for the United We Stand Forum at the Union League Club. Thank you very much for organizing that, Michael. It's going to be wonderful.
Thank you for coming and being part of it.
Thank you.
United We Stand, I picked the name because I figured, and this is something I'm going to mention tomorrow and the symposium itself. I remember this scene from the movie Gladiator, and I don't know if you watched that movie.
Yes.
There was a time where they put him in Rome in a big battlefield, and they didn't know what to expect, what's coming out of these gates. And, it was like a show. They do it in Rome every year, and people are being killed, and, they enjoy to see blood shed over there. And the main character, the gladiator, told everybody else, he said, if we stick together, we're going to survive. If we're going to go away from each other, we're going to be vanished. And he said, whatever comes out of these gates, we have to get rid of. And they opened the gates, a lot of carts and weapons and arrows, and it was crazy. And he won because he had a plan to stick together.
Yes.
So this is what we want to do. So talk to me about what's the benefit of having us sticking together that way?
Well, we have to stick together, just like the example that you mentioned. I think that if we're not sticking together, we get picked off one by one by one. So if we have a unified front, standing up for what we believe in, standing up for the freedom from terror, that's important. Because by ignoring the problem, like President Obama is trying to say this has nothing to do with radical Islam, he won't even mention the words. That ignores the root cause. Yeah. We got to at least get to the root cause. We got to have the ideology changed.
The President Sisi, who is a Muslim president who rules a Muslim country, didn't get scared to stand up and say, we have fundamental problems in the books. We need to explain to the people. We need to educate. We need to rule off all the things that are talk about killing, because this is 1.3 billion people are not going to kill 7 billion people.
Yeah. President al-Sisi is a hero for the modern day. Yeah. He should be remembered for hundreds of years.
Like Martin Luther King.
Yeah, right. Exactly right. He took on the Muslim Brotherhood, who is a dictatorship and a terrorist organization since the 20s. He knocked them on their butt. We need more people like that. President al-Sisi is a hero. The Crown Prince of Bahrain also has said similar things. King Abdullah from Jordan, he's going to take the fight to the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. So we have brave leaders in the Middle East. Just in America, don't give up on us. President Obama is the president now, but he won't be in 2 years. And so people should have faith and be working together to make sure we get positive leadership in the White House that really understands the problem, and that's not going to be so sympathetic and ally to the Muslim Brotherhood like this White House is.
Mr. Gordon, thank you very much for coming to my show, and thank you for being part of the symposium tomorrow, and we hope to come with good things and good steps to take in order to rectify the situation.
Shukran jazilan ya habibi.
Thank you.